Oh, yeah. I'm doing a little more of that again, too.
Are you really?
Yeah,
Good.
things have come around a little, so for a
Oh,
while I
good.
was off of that. All right. Still have a lot to go here, so we'll try to keep up the pace. There's a lot of traps available. You look at suppliers, magazines, and other things. They always mention these traps. And if they're honest to you, they will tell you that all they really do is monitor pest populations and timing. They are an aid to know when things are happening. It's extremely rare to come across a trapping system that is so good that it can reduce the number of a problem. So they often get advertised that way, but they don't. And when gypsy moth was really big time in Michigan there for those years, everybody was selling traps telling you it was going to improve things. And the trap, again, was just designed to let you know when and where things were, and that's how they go. But there are a lot of different traps available that you can order from companies and things to help you understand what's happening and which seasonality of certain insect pests. If you look at the fruit insects as a whole, and this is again kind of a giant overview. I mentioned that there's the direct and indirect types. Correct identification, really important thing, and get whatever help you need to do it right. Some folks like me love to do that, so I don't mind if emails with pictures show up at my door and on my computer. Insects are a lot easier to detect in time, meaning in time to do something, than diseases are. They're big, they're showy, they make damage that is obvious in many cases. Diseases are more cryptic and difficult. By the time you see things going wrong, it's way into the life history of diseases. And for all these various reasons, insects are just somewhat easier to control than diseases. You have a lot more products available. You can do a lot more hand things like picking and pulling of insect problems. So they're the easy part of the picture. Fruit diseases also can be direct, those things that attack the fruit or the edible part itself and those that attack the plant only. Correct identification, again, very important. And in fruit, it's preventative control measures that are most effective, things that are done to avoid having an infection occur, things that are done to lower the risk of infections. For many of the fruit diseases, many diseases in general on plants, by the time you see a symptom, it is virtually ready to reproduce, and they reproduce by outrageously high numbers, millions of spores. So if you wait to see symptoms before reacting, you get into a terrible game of catch-up that you usually lose. And even the spray controls that are available, most of them work by being, or are intended to work best by being in place before the infection occurs to actually stop the infection process, rather than killing an existing infection of a disease that's in the plant. That is the tree fruit and pig overview section. So we're going to apply everything we've learned there now for a rapid run through a number of other fruits. Brambles are a popular item. I think there's money to be made in brambles, and you have a site where you can effectively market with U-Pick or farm market size. They're not good for shipping long distances compared to some fruits. They're very frail, and especially if they have to shake around a lot, they look bad in packaging. But for a fresh sales, roadside sales, U-Pick thing, I think there's some opportunity out there in brambles. There's lots of really neat new varieties available and make a big difference. The two basic groups go with the different terminologies. Raspberry versus, well, there's ones that are known as raspberries, like red raspberry or black raspberry, and there's also those that just go by blackberry without the rasp in there. That's not exactly completely definitive as to which kind of fruit it is. But most of the time, if it has the term rasp in front of berry, it's the ones that have a hollow center that come off like a cap. Used to be black raspberries used to be referred to as black caps. And if they come off of the stem with a little core in them, like these are, it's the ones that do not have the term rasp in there. It's something berry. Most of the brambles are very susceptible to verticillium wilt. a fungal disease that comes in through the root systems. So you should not plant them in sites where there had been a previous bramble crop, strawberry crop, or solanaceous crops like potatoes and tomatoes, unless you go through a cycle of crop rotation and you get a few years out from that previous planting. Because that wilt disease has those other hosts in common, and it will be in the soil for some time following those other plants. That's, of course, in addition to all the other stuff. Good position, not in the lowland sunlight, everything that we covered previously. Brambles love well-drained, relatively sandy soils. They like it if you can get high organic matter content, but they will do okay in other conditions, especially if you do modifications to the soil and do soil amendments. It's much easier to grow them on a cruddy soil that you've improved than a really rich soil that holds a lot of moisture, because they just will have some root issues in those really super good sites that other things should be grown on. Wild brambles, whether it's wild raspberries or blackberries, but all the different kinds of wild relatives are rampant throughout the woods of most of the country, certainly in northern Michigan. Those things are a very big issue for your cultivated brambles because there are a number of virus diseases that are moved by insects relatively quickly that will come in from those plantings and slowly start infecting your cultivated plantings. The farther you are away from a large stand of wild brambles, the better off you are. And if you have a lot of wild brambles in an area, it would be great to try to get rid of as many of them as possible before you try to establish these cultivated ones. A lot of people will tell me, well, the brambles just grow like crazy there in the woods. That's where I should plant my raspberries. And it's really not going to work. You're going to be right amongst all your virus-carrying relatives, and you're going to be in the shade, relatively, compared to where you want to be. You rarely ever see an outstanding crop more than 1 year out of 3, 4, or 5 on those woodland brambles. Every once in a while they do it, but they're not going to be reliable in a site like that. And you're asking for other issues, other problems.
Duke?
Yes?
How close is too close?
Oh,
A football field?
that would be nice. Get away from them. We all know that they're probably out there lurking where we're not looking as well. But yeah, give yourself a large space if you can, hundreds of feet. You'd like to have more. The viruses are moving on in the bodies of little things like aphids and leafhoppers, which can fly great distances. So. I'm not going to go through one variety after another. Some of these slides do have some suggested variety names on here, but what I wanted to do is go through by the different growth types and harvest periods. The classic old-timey brambles that most folks remember from way back times, I remember way too well because I had to pick them on my uncle's farm, are summer bearing, either red raspberries or black raspberries. And they come into bloom in the spring, late spring actually, they're not real early bloomers. And they bear a crop in the summer and it's over with. And a lot of varieties are still like that, and there's still, some of the old varieties are still some of the best. Canby and Latham have been around forever and ever, and they're really good summer red raspberries. There are a bunch of summer-bearing black raspberries. The two of the most popular are actually been around quite a while, Logan and Jewel. Some of them are thornless. That's a wonderful new feature in black raspberries and red raspberries. So you have various things to pick from. There's a new wave of stuff in the last 30 years of fall-bearing raspberries that have the flowers much later in the year and bear the fruit quite late in the fall, sometimes meeting issues of fall frosts. But they're very nice to manage. I'll explain why later. A lot of varieties available, different colors, so you can have quite an array of things available for customers. And things like autumn bliss and fall gold are really nice fruits. So if the plants are healthy, it works very, very well. The newest wave of brambles are more things that were bred and played with until they found stuff that are essentially ever-bearing raspberries, which is a bit of a misnomer. There's two waves of fruit production instead of one, so it's not ever, but it's better than fall alone or summer alone. And again, it depends on how you grow those. You can do it both one way or the other. They're actually adaptable to different In blackberries, most of them come either as erect types that can be grown quite upright into trellises. The trellises are handy because they're quite heavy with fruit. And some are very trailing, and they're harder to manage up into trellis systems and much harder to take care of. So there are erect blackberries, trailing blackberries, a number of these out there now. They all require just a slightly different growing system for you to be able to get the fruit where you want it to be. And the thorns and things are still a hassle, so the thornless ones are wonderful, wonderful things. Usually they're going to come as bare root plants. You can also do cuttings, and from your own plants, they readily will, you can split off the crowns. But just remember that the older your planting is, the more chance it is it already has some viruses in it that have drifted in from outside, and you're probably better off to reestablish with really good plants that you know are certified virus-free from nurseries than it is to keep reproducing off your older stock. You can even get tissue cultured stuff in pots, but that's an expensive way to go. Now the standard system for raspberries and blackberries and stuff is long hedgerows, or at least lengthy rows, plants planted out in spaces like that. Great for production. They're not as good for hand harvest by visiting for U-pick because you can't get around the bush well. You have to work your way down the row. The more and more you want to go to U-pick, the nicer it is to set things up in distinct hills where there's walkways in all directions. But you can do that either way, for yourself or for public. There's lots of different ways to manage brambles. They're very adaptable because you're doing a lot of cutting and selecting every year anyway during the pruning process. For those that tend to flop over from their own weight or to try to maintain trailing ones into the system, simple wire trellises with end posts and things are very useful. A lot of information on the web on doing this, especially from the places that specialize in selling brambles. So it does work very well. It's real simple, easy to set up. This is real basic fertilization information. Again, it's going to vary depending on setting and variety. Typically, there's fertilization after planting, a few weeks after planting, and then the second and third growing seasons, it just increases. And the fertilizer can be early spring or late fall kind of things like tree fruits. And these numbers are based just on a good old 12-12-12 fertilizer. Again, there might be something more appropriate that you would know once you got a soil test for a particular site. So pruning is where all the fun comes in with raspberries, how you make them do what you want them to do. The standard summer-bearing plants vary a little bit in how this happens, but this is how it happens. In year one, the stuff that comes up this spring will grow up to maybe very high, or this height. The ones that get really tall, usually manage them by pinching them off at a certain height so they're not too tall. That will only grow vegetatively in the first year, produces shoots, leaves, and some buds for next year's growth. That has to go through the winter, and you can thin them down to a certain density in the dormant season, as typically what's done, so you don't have too crowded planting. And it's the growth off of that one-year-old material that occurs the second year that bears flowers and fruits. So in the first year, it's called a primocane or primocane. In the second year, they're called floricanes. They graduate, because they're the ones that are going to bloom. And during that second year, you're raising another set of primocanes. You're always raising a set that's going to be next year's crop, and also raising the shoots off of the previous year's growth. And that's how summer-bearing ones operate. In the dormant season, you'll have this massive stand of things that are either dead fruiting canes. The floricanes die after they bear. So you have to go in and cut out the dead floricanes and thin the primocanes down to a density that's suitable for you to work with in terms of how wide a row you want to have, how far in you have to reach through the thorns and that kind of thing, and how long and dense you want it. That's the hard part of summer-bearing red raspberries. You get a nice uniform crop, you get it early in the season, a lot more management to it. When they invented fall-bearing raspberries, I don't know how it happened, but somehow they figured this out. They can grow from the ground in the same year to a shoot, to the growth of flowers and fruits, but it takes them a whole year to do it, so you get the crop in the fall. And when that cane is done, you can just cut it off. You can mow it to the ground in the fall or the spring, and you do the whole thing over again from ground zero each year. It is so marvelous. You still may have to thin it sometimes if you have too many of them, but nothing to survive the winter above ground. All cold hardiness issues are pretty much whipped with fall-bearing red raspberries because all the plant that's alive is protected under the ground during the winter.
That is if you have a long enough growing.
If you have a long enough growing season. So choose them with short growing seasons, the relatively shorter ones are the fall bearings. Have some of the summer bearing ones as well, and you can have a fairly lengthy harvest season of raspberries. And the new ones, the so-called everbearers, are able to be managed so that they will bear a crop in the spring and the fall if you prune them correctly. That's more complicated, and I didn't want to put that up here, but if you want to get into those, all the instructions for how it's done are there. I don't think you can beat this system if you have the season to grow them. But again, I don't think there's any standard black raspberry, classic black cap, that does this. So there's some things you just can't do yet. So your biggest issues in brambles is going to be your usual run of fruit infesting insects and diseases and things. But the additional important thing in brambles is that virus disease issue is really critical. The virus diseases of brambles don't necessarily kill them, but they greatly reduce their ability to fruit. So as time goes on, you get smaller and smaller fruits, more of those crumbly little fruits, where they don't have all the little seeds and portions of the fruit intact. So you really should start with virus-tested, certified virus-tested planting stock, although it will be more expensive. It is the best thing in the long run. There are some nematodes that can move viruses around, so it's good to know, good to test for nematodes before planting brambles. Separate the new plantings from old. If you have enough property to do it, that's great. If you don't, it's difficult. And of course, controlling the wild brambles is also a challenge if you don't have the ability to manage a lot of the territory that you're planting in. Managing vectors, meaning killing the insects that move the viruses around, is pretty tough to do. It only takes one aphid with a virus feeding on a plant long enough, a few hours maybe, to infect an entire plant for the rest of its life. So you're not going to be able to really efficiently keep every one of those darn little aphids or other vectors from moving in and providing diseases. So it's very important to destroy infected plants and to destroy potential sources of infection from wild brambles. That's the fast run through brambles. Those of you who know me well realize that I'm avoiding talking about insects very much here, so I could waste the whole night talking about the insect pests and these things. I decided not to go heavy in blueberries, since I know Mark Longstroth probably did a great job last year, and it's certainly not my forte either, so I didn't want to step out of my bounds on blueberries. But there are plenty of blueberry varieties available that will grow in all portions of Michigan, either high bush blueberries or low bushes. Low bush blueberries don't come in a lot of different varieties. In fact, most of the states that specialize in growing low bush blueberries are managing wild planting, essentially. They just take care of it very well, because low bush blueberry grows so rampantly through a lot of the eastern United States. These are the ones where pH really matters. Your best blueberry territory is going to be around 4.5 to 5. And it's true if you want to play any silly games with cranberries as well. And I could have brought them in, but hardly anybody tries to grow those. They're very close relatives and similar pH range needs. So if you're in the 6 range or so, you can manipulate it down with additions of sulfur and other products. And with repeated applications, you might be able to stay in the range. If you're starting in the 7s and a little higher, it's really going to be hard to make enough soil amendments practically and cost efficiently to keep yourself into blueberry range. It can be done, but it's really not what you ought to be doing with that piece of ground. Concentrate on other crops that can tolerate those pHs or like those pHs. If you have a naturally acidic site, it's fun to play blueberries. There are a number of varieties over quite a range of harvest seasons now. There's USDA Research Lab in New Jersey has been releasing more and more varieties in recent years. This slide is not up to date. There's a bundle more. And so there's a good variety of size, texture, flavor, things like that in blueberries that there never was in previous years. Blueberry root condition is really different looking than these other fruits we've mentioned so far. Their roots are super fibrous and dense and thick. It's harder to plant them. You really have to do more to get the soil to settle in amongst the roots, or you'll end up with a lot of air pockets around them as they're growing as you first plant them. And then that really doesn't work well. So you have to do an excellent job of getting soil and root mix in contact and watering them in. Other than that, they're usually not grafted plants. I don't think I've ever seen one, so you at least don't have to worry about things like that. They're growing their own roots. Same with brambles. They're almost, as far as I know, entirely own root things. Blueberry fertilization is a little bit different. They prefer urea or ammonium. Well, actually, ammonium sulfate is the typical nitrogen source that's used because it's an acidifying agent. Or actually, I got that wrong. You don't want to use certain kinds of nitrogen ingredients that will change the pH too much. Now, most nitrogen fertilizers do slightly lower the pH. And that's why we end up applying lime from time to time for a lot of crops. Of course, if you start too low and you go down lower, or you start low and you go lower, it can be a problem. So there's all kinds of things that can cause you to get into the wrong place of pH. And it's really more important than crops that are critically grown in a narrow band. I would say in blueberry production, you probably want to do soil samples more often than you would on all these other things, because you want to keep a real close eye year to year on where your pH is if you're growing them in a site where you had to do some modifications to get it down. If it's a very natural acidic site, usually they stay just about right. Blueberry training and pruning stuff is more like a tree fruit because you have a lot of perennial stuff above ground, not like the brambles where every other year or so everything goes away. So it's the same principles. Once you have an older bush, you're looking for the diseased and weakened parts. Pruning those out. If you have lots of growth, there's lots of different growing points out of the ground, which is usually what you get to eventually. You go into a cycle of removing the oldest wood each year. It says here remove 2 oldest canes. It all depends on how many are there, right? You only had 2. You want to do that. But a portion, like a quarter or a third of the oldest wood every year. And if you do that every year, you maintain a nice age distribution of 1-year-old wood, 2-year wood, 3-year-old wood, and then the oldest stuff goes away. The oldest stuff bears fruit, but not as efficiently as the 2- and 3- and 4-year-old stuff. So you want the 1-year-old stuff every year to start renewing that plant. Then you keep the middle-aged stuff for good production and take out the old stuff as you go along. And you can cut it as low to the ground as you can go. If you happen to be in a spot where you have a bunch of blueberries that have just grown out of control for years, say they came with a piece of property, you can mow blueberry bushes down with a bush hog and they will come back. They are really remarkably tough. And I've seen that done commercially. There are a number of pest issues and things like that, but managing their productivity cycle is very important to keep them producing at a constant pace. And I'm not really going to do anything else on blueberries because you need to know about them. Get in touch with us folks at Extension. We have several people that have worked in blueberries for a lot. And I thought it'd be better for me to play on a couple more varieties of things here that you don't get as much information on sometimes.
Just
Yeah.
a quick question. If you've got wild blueberries around you. Is there an issue with the wild blueberries and the domestic blueberries?
Not as serious as it is with brambles.
Okay.
In fact, if you have really nice bushy stands of wild blueberries,
Take care of that.
take care of them. They'll last a long, long time. They're almost invincible. And it's really fun sometimes because you get different flavors and